chapter 16 and beginning at verse 13. Interesting setting for this passage. This, as far as we know, is the furthest Jesus traveled away from Jerusalem during his ministry. It is a very non-Jewish place where this expression about himself happens. Archaeologists have told us that in this vicinity of Caesarea Philippi there were all kinds of graffiti carved on stones that had to do with other gods. It is here that Jesus makes clear his identity to his own. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he said to his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then Jesus sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. May God add a blessing to this his word. Now, if you have this purple insert in your bulletins, this is a helpful thing to have out in front of you right now. Those of you who like to take notes and follow along with where I'm going, here it is. Whose church is it anyway? 3 weeks ago, we were privileged to be led in worship by the young men of God. Remember that? They have discussed at length among themselves the question, who do people say that I am? Who does the culture around me say that I am? Am I defined by the size of my muscles, the number of my friends, the number of my activities, the number of my girlfriends? Whether I can bully others, how many parties I've been to with underage drinking? Who do people say that I am? The young men of God have dealt with that. They know that our culture has very definite ideas about who they are. Our culture shapes us and defines us, sometimes in helpful, but sometimes in not so helpful ways. However, the young men of God know that they have another message about who they are, and that the most important question of all is, who does God say that I am? Who does God say that I am? That's the most important question for every one of us. There's actually a very similar question that can be asked about the church. Who do people say that the church is? And our culture has very definite ideas about what the church is. Our society understands the church to be a place that meets people's needs for spiritual well-being, for community, for moral teaching, for inspiration, for, in some cases, entertainment, for, in some cases, supporting the American way. Our culture classifies the church, classifies it in order to help people understand it from the culture's perspective. It puts the church in a category, so the church has its place. Like young men, like young women, society defines the church. Society shapes the church, sometimes in helpful, sometimes in not so helpful ways. Today, American society classifies church as an optional leisure time activity. Now, optional leisure time activity is correct in one sense, namely that the church is largely composed of volunteers who donate their time. That's true enough. Optional leisure time activity is incorrect in another sense, namely that the church is a group which puts its energy into competing with other groups for people's leisure hours. That the church is in a competition for popularity. So the wider social impression is that the church, as of course only one option for people's leisure time in a tight competition, is an organization that is highly motivated by numbers. That's the social impression. The church is an organization highly motivated by numbers, attendance, classes, members, worship services, money, conversions, programs, seminars, website hits. According to our society, the church, and there's reason why they get this impression, the church is a group highly motivated by numbers. And many congregations across all denominations buy into this idea of the church defined by popularity. The church defined by popularity. And they buy into it by doing all kinds of things to attract people, to gain popularity. All kinds of things. Now, I want to be clear that not all of this is bad. Over recent years, lots of congregations have discovered all kinds of ways to sensitize themselves to people who walk in the door for the first time, to genuinely learn how to be more welcoming to new people. That's a good thing. But of course, the quest for popularity isn't all good. The pressure to be popular easily shades into crass marketing techniques and gimmicks and manipulation to seal the deal, or sometimes in the complete opposite direction, being so careful not to offend that the church doesn't really stand for anything, theologically, practically, or otherwise, and has nothing very clear to offer people spiritually. In any case, there is a very strong pressure on churches, on all churches today, to be defined by popularity. Popularity. Who do people say that the church is? Another way our society defines church is as a consumer product. As a consumer product. Hey, even church people sometimes use that kind of language. You ever heard somebody say, I'm shopping for a church? I'm shopping for a church. Okay, visiting and trying out various congregations in order to find a fit, that has some legitimacy. It does. And yet our pervasive consumer perspective in America easily distorts the meaning of church. People come to expect church to work like a toaster. It's a product, right? And like any other product, they pay for it through offerings, right? And they expect it to do what they want because they're the owners of the product. And if it doesn't do what they want, well, then they do the equivalent of throwing it out and getting a new product that does what it should. Who do people say that the church is? Our society has definite ideas about that. The church defined by popularity and the church defined by product. Those are two powerful ways that American culture defines the church. And they are everywhere around us, inside as well as outside the church. Well, just like the young men of God discovered, there is another source which tells the church who it really is. Who do the scriptures say that the church is? There are numerous passages we could look at to explore the biblical definition of church. Today I'm going to choose just one, and if you have your Bibles, you can turn to that. It's Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 15. Colossians 3, verses 12 through 15, also on your outline there. And this text tells us three things that define the church from God's perspective. Three things that define the church. We are a people chosen by God, holy, and beloved. Chosen by God, holy, and beloved. Each of those words describes what God means by the church. All right, first, we are chosen. Listen to the passivity in that word. We are not choosers, we are chosen. In Greek, the word for church is ekklesia. Ekklesia. Literally, the called out ones. The called out ones. The called out by God. Being the church is not our idea. We've been chosen, elected, drafted, as surely as Abraham and Sarah were. It is God's initiative to make the church. You might recall what Jesus told his disciples on the eve of his own death. Remember, you did not choose me. I have chosen you. Church is not our idea. The church is chosen. And secondly, we are holy. Now, at its root, the word holy is not a moral category. Holy means set apart. Set apart. Not set apart in the sense of being better than others, but set apart in the sense of having a special role, of being specialized. The church is set apart to be not of this world precisely so that it can be for the world. Again, like Abraham and Sarah, God has set the church apart to be his special partners in order to bless all of the families of the earth. Tremendous ripple effect envisioned by God's definition of church. The church is holy. And third, we are beloved. We are beloved. The Greek word is agapemenoi. Agapemenoi. Perhaps you can hear in that the similar word, agape, self-sacrificing, other-oriented love. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit grammatical here because it's way neato. I'm going to get a little bit grammatical. This word, agapemenoi, is a plural perfect passive participle. Plural perfect passive participle. If you want to parse that in front of somebody, you want to take a step backwards. Plural perfect passive participle. For us, that means two important things. Once again, the passive voice means our belovedness is not something we did. It's something that God has given to us. And second, the Greek perfect tense refers to our belovedness as something already accomplished, but that has enduring effect. If you like math, it's like a vector instead of a point. It starts here, but it keeps on going. Our belovedness is something that has enduring effect, not over, but a story to be continued. And I'll pair here a neat Old Testament text from Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verses 6 and 7, which calls God's first chosen and holy people beloved. You are not more numerous than all the other people, as if that was some attractiveness to God. You were the fewest of all peoples, yet God set his heart on you. God set his heart on you. And you are God's segulah. Segulah, beautiful Hebrew word. God's treasured possession. God's treasured possession. In later Hebrew, this same word can mean a family heirloom. To God, the church, you and I are like great-grandma's tortoiseshell combs that she brought with her on the boat from Russia. We are treasured, precious, and honored. The church is beloved. So there it is. There it is. God's definition of church. God has a very clear idea of what the church is. God calls us chosen, holy, and beloved. These are not things we have achieved. God gives the church its identity. We are church by God's idea, God's gift, God's empowerment, and it is through God's strength, as Colossians 3 goes on, that we can be compassionate and kind and humble and gentle and patient and forbearing and forgiving and loving. Who do the scriptures say that the church is? That's who we are. That's the church in biblical perspective. And if you didn't hear anything about popularity or being a product, you heard correctly. God has given the church that identity to empower us in every age, across the span of the eons. And the central challenge for the church, friends, in any age, in any place, on any issue, is always the same. The central challenge for the church is to remember and to live from our God-given identity. That's it. The central challenge for the church is always the challenge of identity. Who are we? Now, that is to say that the real challenge for the church is never a challenge posed to it from outside of it. It is always the challenge posed from within. In any age, in any place, on any issue, the challenge for the church is always the same. It is to remember and to live from our God-given identity. Who does God say that we are? And here's where Jesus nailed it. He said that the answer to who we are is to remember whose we are. The answer to who we are is to remember whose we are. Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." The church belongs to Jesus Christ. He is the one and only, undisputed and indisputable Lord of the church. The church is His. Now that might sound so obvious as to be unnecessary to say, yet my experience is that most Christians, including myself, tend to act like it's my church. See, if it's my church, then I get to pursue what I want. If it's your church, you get to pursue what you want. If it's the experts' church, then we ask the experts, and they tell us what to do, and we pursue what the experts want. If it's the majority's church, then we vote, and we do what the majority wants. But if it's Christ's church, we pursue what Christ wants, which is not what I want, or what you want, or what the experts want, or what the majority wants. Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." My church. The church is not a democracy. It is a monarchy. The church obeys its one and only Lord, the one who gave the church its identity, the one to whom the church belongs. The answer to who we are is always whose we are. Now today I'd like to share with you 5 principles in order to deepen our identity as Christ's church. Number 1, church is something we are, not something we do. Number 2, the church, like Christ, accepts everybody where they're at, and the church expects everyone, especially itself, to be transformed from where they're at. Number 3, the measure of the church's success is not popularity, but faithfulness. Number 4, the number 1 transformation disciples need to make is changing their lifestyles. Number 5, the church is not called to be relevant to people. The church is calling people to become relevant to God. The church does not help people fit God into their lives. It helps people fit into the life of God. Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it," because Christ shines his light on his church, because Christ pours out his Spirit on his church, because Christ floats his church in the river of his goodness, because Christ opens his church to the power of his possibilities. Brothers and sisters, I'm sorry you're different. It was the boss's idea.